Hey everybody, and welcome to day 16 of Foundations. Today we are going to learn a couple of new poses. For those of you interested in Sanskrit, we're going to be learning Utkatasana and Malasana. And if you're not interested in Sanskrit, they're more commonly known as chair pose or fierce pose and Garland pose or squat. So we'll just call them chair and squat. Before we move into chair pose, let's start in child's pose. I don't have any props today, but if you know that you like to use props, or if you have them around, go ahead and pause the video and grab them, have them handy. A couple of things that you might want to have if you want to use props are a block, and maybe you want to pull your mat next to the wall for our squat pose. That might be helpful. All right, so let's go ahead and get started in a child's pose, And coming on down to the mats, I'm going to take my knees wide and feet together. And we've already learned child's pose, so if there are any modifications that you want to take, you are of course welcome to take those. So the reason we're starting in child's pose is to really open up the shoulders here. So I'm going to walk my hands forward. This is technically called an extended child's pose when you have your hands reaching up overhead instead of long down by your sides. There we go. So I'm just gonna pause in this moment of rest, taking time to appreciate this space on my mat, being grateful for a healthy body. Maybe not completely functioning. Everybody always has something going on in their body that's not necessarily ideal in our own opinions. But we all have so much to be appreciative of, to be grateful for in our bodies. Things that often we take for granted, just basic health, basic movement. We may always be wishing to be something else, to be somehow else, more flexible, stronger. But don't take for granted what you already have. If you have a lot of space in your shoulders, you can come up onto the chin. That might feel a little bit better. On your nose if you're smushing your nose into the mat like I am. Just soften the muscles of the face, especially the muscles around the eyes and the mouth, loosening the jaw, the space between the eyebrows. Appreciate this moment of stillness and quiet. We're breathing deeply in and out the nose, letting the breath fill and empty as it moves through the body. Just a few more moments here. Alright, so we're going to move really slowly out of child's pose and into tabletop. Bringing the knees in line under the hips and the wrists under the shoulders. So from tabletop, let's warm up the spine a little bit, connecting breath and movement. Inhaling to drop the belly, really stretching everything. And exhale, round the spine. Tuck the tail and drop the head. Inhale, coming back through cow pose. And exhale, round the spine for cat pose. Keep moving at the pace of your own breath. And one more round here. There's a very insistent mosquito on my arm. All right, so come back to a neutral spine. And let's just get in touch with our core here for a moment. So take your left leg and lift it straight out behind you. You don't want to lift it too high because then you'll start dumping in the belly. But just to a level where you can start to feel a little bit of engagement in your core muscles here. And if your balance is there for you today, you can even start to pick up the opposite hand here so the right hand can reach out ahead. Good. We're just going to hold there, strengthening the muscles of the core. This is called spinal balance, at least this is what I have been taught is called. Some people might call it something else, but this is like your little bonus lesson for today. Core strengthening. Good. All right, let's let that go and move to the other side. So lifting the right leg and then the left hand if you're feeling it today. Draw belly button up to spine, finding the source of your strength deep within your body. Keep breathing, don't hold your breath. And release that back down to the ground. All right, let's melt the hips back for one more child's pose. Opening the hips with knees wide and curling the fingertips up towards the mat. This time, if you're feeling flexible in the shoulders, you can not only lift your chin or your head a little bit, you can come up onto the fingertips, which feels really nice in my shoulders. Of course, you can always be down here. Everybody's different and we work with what we have. Some of us are more open in some places and less open in other places. That's perfectly normal. I'm the same way. I tend to be flexible in the shoulders and not as flexible in the hips. You might be opposite. All right, so let's let that go and we're gonna learn our first new pose. So chair pose, Utkatasana, fierce pose. Come to standing, and I will show you this pose from the side. So, as with many of our standing poses, you can stand either with feet together or feet under hips. So you can stack those ankles, knees, hips, or you can bring toes to touch, slightly separating the heels. Your choice here. But either way, make sure your legs are nice and strong and active, kneecaps pulling up slightly, and we'll start with a nice neutral pelvis, not flaring out the tail, not tucking the tail too much, but just a nice, comfortable, neutral standing position with a long, tall spine. So our goal is to keep this spine nice and long, to stand up nice and tall as we start before we sink our hips back into Utkatasana, chair pose. Utkatasana literally means fierce pose, but most people just call it chair pose. All right, so let's start with the arms. Let's reach the arms up. And this is why we've opened the shoulders, because getting the arms straight up with your biceps right here by your ears, in line with your ears, can be really challenging for those of us who aren't so open in the shoulders. Sometimes you can be really strong, but you might have trouble with the flexibility area in the shoulders. And this takes a lot of time to work on. So something that seems simple may not be so simple. And remember that as you learn these basic poses in yoga. They might be basic, but they're not necessarily easy. So I've got my arms reaching up. My shoulders are melting down away from my ears. And from here, I'm going to start to sink my hips back, bending at the knees. Good. And as I slowly sink my hips back, I'm keeping my spine nice and long and straight. So I'm not flaring out my tailbone, sticking my butt out. I'm not really tucking the tailbone either, but I'm just moving my hips back as I keep my spine nice and long, and I'm trying to keep my arms up by my ears, which is really challenging. Pin belly button up to spine. Glutes are super active here, so find your strength here. There we go. Good, and try to keep your weight in your heels. So instead of leaning forward into the toes, sink the hips back and weight is in the heels. If you want to check that, you can pick up your toes. Whoo, that feels great, doesn't it? Doesn't it? And we're gonna stand back up on the count of 3. 1, 2, and 3. Whew. All right, so that's your chair pose. And we're gonna go ahead and move on to our next pose, which is Malasana, Hindi squat, Garland pose. We'll just call it a squat. All right, so for squat, this is the one if you are using props, you can use a block and you can use the wall. I don't have them, but I will tell you how to incorporate those if you choose to do so. So to come into a squat, I'm gonna have my feet fairly wide. And for most of us, we're gonna want to point the toes out slightly, but you're gonna have to make your own adjustments. And yoga is a huge learning experience, and you learn about yourself and about your body, and you learn to extend yourself to some gratitude to yourself and some kindness and forgiveness and graciousness. It's all about learning those things. Being patient with yourself, really, and not expecting yourself to look like anybody else. And this is a really important lesson to learn in this pose in particular, because we are all so different in the hip area. All right, so I'm gonna sink my hips down into a squat, and your heels probably are gonna come up. So you might be up on your toes like this. And this is where you might sit on a block. So you can sit the hips back down on a block to support yourself. And you can also do this pose against a wall so that your back is leaning against the wall. So you can use both of those. You can be sitting on a block and leaning against the wall. That can really help you ease into the pose, instead of just feeling, oh my gosh, my shins are burning, when does this stop? You can find a more passive way of being in the pose, which can really signal to your body, oh, okay, I can rest and relax here. I can get into that rest and digest mode and acclimate a little bit. So yes, you might be up on your toes. I'm gonna bring my hands, palms to touch here, and I've got my arms pressing my knees outward. Eventually, you might work towards heels coming down onto the ground. I've been doing this pose for years, so my heels being on the ground is not how I started. It's also not a new thing for me. I practice this pose all the time. This is a resting pose for me. Maybe not for you yet. One day. And just make sure your arches of your feet aren't collapsing inward. If your arches are collapsing inward, so look down at the inner arches of your feet here, and if it's just rolling down, pressing down towards the mat, and the blade of your foot on the outer edge of your foot is popping up, maybe widen your stance a little bit and adjust where the angle of your feet, so where they're pointing towards. Maybe move them in or out. Just find, again, listen to your body. Everybody's different. So this is a nice place for my feet, and I feel comfortable here in this pose. All right, so to come out of this pose, most people will not have the strength to pop up out of this pose, and that can be really hard on your joints too if you have knee or ankle issues. So to come out of the pose, I'll show you from the side. You can just pop down out of it. If you're working on building a more advanced pose, this is your last little tidbit for this tutorial, you can start to work on popping into a squat and up to a chair pose after that, and then rolling back down. That's just something fun, a bonus for day 16 of foundations. All right, so that's all I have for you. Next time on day 17, we'll be learning Warrior 1, your first warrior, and pyramid pose. I'll see you then. Namaste.